On Friday, Robinhood got admitted into the S&P 500 index. This is important for a couple of reasons. And so in this video, I want to cover the Robinhood implications, but I also want to cover the implications for other names. Among them is SoFi, who is one in contention. And I wanted to provide some more clarity around that specifically, because I know SoFi investors are probably wondering, okay, this is great for Robinhood. And many of them also own Robinhood stock, but they're wondering when will the day come for SoFi? And so in this video, I hope to provide a little bit of clarity on that. Let's jump right in. So first and foremost, I want to say congratulations to all the Robinhood shareholders out there because this stock is absolutely incredible. It's up over 14% today, and it's also up about 200% year to date. And one of the reasons is obviously the fact that it's a well-performing stock. Fundamentally, the company is performing. I, of course, am a shareholder in Robinhood, although I bought a little bit later than everybody else. My cost basis is somewhere in the low 60s. I'm enjoying it nonetheless. I've been following them now for about 2 or 3 quarters consistently and looking into their numbers. And I'm shocked I really didn't get in earlier because it is a very product driven company. So, from that perspective, I'm really bullish on the prospect of Robinhood getting in. And in addition to being up over 14% today, Robinhood is also one of the top trending tickers on Ape Wisdom, which tracks stock mentions and upvotes over Reddit. Of course, something like this is not a traditional metric that you would judge any company by. It's all short term mentions, but it's also relevant to see because it speaks to the volume of chatter that goes on around something like Robinhood. This is also something that I like to look at on a regular basis just to see what the market and particularly the retail investment community is looking at. So you can see some popular names: ASTS, Nvidia, Open Door, obviously with its massive run up, United Healthcare, Tesla, and Robinhood has just jumped a whole bunch of spaces, up 293% in terms of social traffic in the past 24 hours alone. And it goes without saying. Now, I also wanted to share this. This is Evan who posted on Friday saying that the S&P will announce later today what companies are added to the index. And as we know, Robinhood has been snuffed from the S&P 500 index a couple of times, and so it's very fitting that they're admitted. But I know that my audience is a SoFi related audience, and here we have StockGoat has overlaid the X's here on stocks that have made it into the S&P 500, and these are some remaining candidates of eligible stocks who may join the S&P 500 very shortly, of which SoFi is one of them. Now, there was some thinking around since Interactive Brokers got into the S&P 500 very recently that Robinhood would not make it in this time around because they're both finance related, but in fact they did. So that is dispelled to some degree, and SoFi could make it into the S&P as early as the next inclusion window. Let's go back now to Evan's post here around when the S&P announces its quarterly rebalance. It does so every year on the first Friday of March, June, September, which was last Friday, and December. So the first Friday of December is the next major date that we should be looking for SoFi to potentially get into the S&P 500. And if not, then the first Friday of March is also an important date. Now, barring this, Evan's post also continues to highlight here, you also get rebalancing when somebody in the 500 that are accepted is acquired or something happens, with those companies, and there's a slot that opens up. Often, when the markets close on the same day, the company being acquired stops trading, and at that point, there's an open slot where another company is added. Here's a couple of companies that have been added into the S&P 500. Of course, Interactive Brokers was the latest to be added in August of 2025, but in July 2025, we also had Square, who got in over Robinhood, and I know a lot of retail shareholders were not happy about that. We also had the Trade Desk and Datadog. In May, we had Coinbase, and in March, you had DoorDash, Williams-Sonoma, a whole bunch of other companies here. And going back all the way, you can see in 2024, in September, what Palantir got added. In June 2024, CrowdStrike got added, among others. SMCI got added in March of 2024, Lululemon in October 2023, and so on and so forth. And so I think this post really highlights well the history of companies being added into the index, of which Robinhood is the latest, who got added in September of 2025. Now, it's important to also keep in mind this list of who are the next eligible candidates to be added. I think there's a lot of companies here you can make a case about. Probably SoFi. I mean, if I had to put on my bear case, I would say it requires a couple of quarters because it's rare that companies are immediately added the first quarter that they're eligible. So more likely we would see a March inclusion here as opposed to a December inclusion. But of course, you can see here that you have also dates, you have rebalances that are not necessarily on the first Friday of March, June, September, and December. Here you had July, May. You also have rebalances across the year. So there could be opportunities for SoFi to be added to the S&P 500 this year. And if so, the most likely candidate for that would be the first Friday of December. But again, I think that more likely is the first Friday of March, and if not, then the first Friday of June, which of course is almost a year away for SoFi. But within the next 12 months, I think there's an incredibly high likelihood that they will make it in. And I would even go so far as to say within the next 6 months, which would be the first Friday of March, is when they would make it into the index. Why do we care? Well, generally speaking, you care about the S&P 500 inclusion for a couple of reasons. The first and foremost is that it provides increased demand from index funds and ETFs. Because when a stock is added to the S&P 500, all of these ETFs that track the index, like the Vanguard S&P 500 Index, the VOO, or the Spider S&P 500 ETF, they're all required to purchase a stock to maintain alignment with the index composition. And that obviously creates a surge in demand, and it leads to some short-term price volatility to the upside. This is also why you see Robinhood now being up 14% the following day after the inclusion. You also have big institutional investor awareness. The inclusion in the index signals generally that this is the best 500 companies in the world, and that often leads to analyst coverage. It leads to investor interest. It leads to a lot of funds and institutions following that stock and buying it, and also increasing the stock price. Now, with that comes lower cost of capital, because being part of the S&P can reduce a company's cost of capital as the increased demand and the liquidity lowers the risk premium investors want back from that stock, which can make it easier for companies to raise funds through equity or debt offerings. So it's good from a financial lens as well. Not that Robinhood needs the money, or a lot of these companies that are added is a testament to them being the best of the best, but it does lead to that as well. It leads to improved liquidity because there's more trading volume. It's traded more as a part of the S&P 500 index, and it leads to a whole bunch of other positives. But I think one of the biggest catalysts is that stocks who are recently added to the index outperform ones that aren't by a pretty good margin, just for the fact that they're added to the index as a result of all of this volume coming in for the reasons that I just listed out. So obviously that's going to bode well for Robinhood. And it could also bode well for SoFi when they eventually make it in. So whether SoFi eventually gets in December, which is in about 3 months from now, or in March, which I think is the most likely candidate in about 6 months, or even in June, which is in about 9 months, I do think that them having met all of the eligibility requirements, including the market cap requirement, which was the last one that SoFi ticked off, that they will get in relatively soonish in the next year or so. I think it's going to happen under a year, and I think it's going to be very, very positive for the stock because, as we know, the company is continuously executing, and the S&P 500 only has limited number of spots for the 500 best companies in the world, of which I think SoFi is one of, and it proves it every subsequent quarter when they continue to grow and accelerate. I think Robinhood does that very well as a product-driven company, and I think SoFi is no different. So we'll see what happens. Congratulations again to all the Robinhood shareholders. I definitely was pleased to wake up in the morning and see this thing was up 13-14%. But I wasn't surprised as a result of it because I have seen the reaction to other companies being into the S&P. And as a result, it's a catalyst for a lot of companies for them to be added into the S&P 500. In fact, for SoFi as well, it's a catalyst. People online talk about S&P 500 inclusion as though it's, a new business line for SoFi because it has that level of impact from a shareholder returns perspective through stock appreciation. It doesn't really do anything fundamentally for the company other than maybe the cost of capital because it might be cheaper to raise money in the future. But it's still good to have because of what it signals and because of the perception that it gives out there. And a lot of institutions really care about that. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.